Hey, how's it going everybody? Swagkage here, and today I'm going to be doing something pretty ambitious, at least in my opinion, and that is ranking every single fight in Naruto, with a little asterisk at the end, admittedly. In order for a fight to be considered, it has to have happened in the manga, so no movies, no filler, any of that. That said, I will be taking both the manga and anime versions of all of these fights into account, but again, if it didn't happen in the manga, I'm not going to talk about it. And while I am going to be covering plenty of minor fights, many of which are very short, for the sake of keeping the first chunk of this video from being miserable and super boring both to watch and to make, there are some fights I'm going to be leaving out. I'm not going to be ranking all of them. Like, let's be honest, nobody cares what I think about like Tobirama versus Izuna, Gaara versus Dosu, Naruto versus Kidomaru. There's just no point, so I'm not gonna bother. Having said that, I do still have 99 fights to go over, so this is probably gonna be a really long video. If you want to skip around, I'll be using a tier maker template I made to divide the fights into 9 groups of 11 each, and I'll leave timestamps to each of these sections in the description. Starting us off is G tier, which I would describe as fights that are not good. This is really the only bad section of the list, so don't brace yourself for too much complaining or anything. We're gonna be in positive territory pretty soon. In the meantime though, I can't ignore these fights. We do have to talk about them, so I'll just try to make it quick. Yeah, this fight sucks. It's terrible. Nobody likes it. It's the worst fight in the series. It is so boring. And on top of that, it's totally pointless. There's no reason for it to be here. It's just padding. You can skip it and probably not even notice. This fight sucks for all the reasons that the Team Guy one does. In fact, I could probably just copy-paste the audio from that section and you'd know exactly how I feel about this fight. I'm honestly shocked that there are 2 fights in the series even worse than this one is. It's such a nothing battle. Like, I don't care about Mifune, first of all. Second off, it's really short and there aren't any cool moments in it. And even though it's short, I still hate that the story has to come to a screeching halt just so we can see Mifune fight reanimated Hanzo. Like, who cares, man? Alright, so I'm just gonna come out and spoil a surprise. I put all of the War Arc fights that happen before Naruto and B leave to go help everybody down here together in G tier. I don't like any of them. And now, you could probably argue for their specific placements to be a bit different. Like, maybe some of them could be in the middle of F tier. Maybe some of them could be at the bottom of E tier. But the beginning of the War Arc is so bad that, like, I'm not gonna split hairs over it. I don't care. I thought it would just be easier to group them all up together. The reason this is above Mifune versus Hanzo is because I like Ino, Shikamaru, Choji, and Darui, and that's about it, really. The reason this is above the last one is because Big Choji and Big Choji Dad punched the big statue, and I like it more. Did you know that this is a boss fight in Storm 3? In fact, so is the last one. You know what isn't a boss fight in that game? Sasuke versus Danzo. You know what else? Naruto and B versus Nagato and Itachi. Anyway, this fight is pretty cool conceptually, and like I already said, I do like Awesome's team, but I don't know, I don't ever really think about this fight. The Storm 3 version is actually pretty cool, but in both the manga and the anime, this failed to leave a lasting impression on me, and an execution just felt like a waste of time. As cool as the Seven Swordsmen are, and as cool as it is to see Kakashi fight Zabuza and Haku again, this fight also felt like a waste of time. It doesn't do anything to progress the plot, and the stakes are pretty low because it's not like Kakashi's gonna die here. If he didn't die fighting Pain, or at the very least if he didn't stay dead after fighting Pain, there's no way that Kishimoto was gonna kill him here in a fight against reanimated Zabuza and Haku. It's not the worst thing in the universe, it's definitely one of the better early War Arc fights, but that's not really high praise. I think this is where this fight goes. I don't know. It was early enough in the War Arc and featured minor enough characters that I actually believed that some of them could die, like Omoi, Kankuro, Sai. None of these characters felt immune to being killed off. The fight also has some interesting gimmicks and choreography, like we don't get to see Sai fight that much. Sasori using other living people as puppets is really cool. Kankuro getting a rematch with Sasori felt like it made sense, and this is also actually the only time we see Deidara and Sasori fight together in the manga. Now don't get me wrong, this fight's not great, I just think it's better than all of the fights I put below it. Okay, so out of all of the early war fights, this is the best one in my opinion because something actually happens in it. Yamato gets captured by Kabuto. Now, that doesn't end up really going anywhere, but still, it's something. It makes the fight feel less like a chunk of dead time than all the others I talked about so far. There's also some neat stuff that happens, like the airborne battle between Inoki and Deidara, I like well enough, and Kabuto fighting everybody else and getting trapped in the lime and then turning into a snake and gobbling Yamato up is not bad. Yeah, the beginning of the War Arc is that bad. I know some people like this fight, but it's just like a canon filler fight. It doesn't tell us anything about the characters that we need to know. We already kind of got what Shino and Kankuro are capable of from their preliminary fights. It just doesn't need to happen. Now, I wouldn't care if the fight was good, but it's pretty forgettable. Alright, so next up we have F tier, and this isn't your standard typical F tier, which would normally imply absolutely awful, the worst thing you've ever seen before. The fights in this tier actually aren't bad. They're not exceptional or anything, but they're definitely not what you would normally consider F tier quality. Remember, each tier is capped at 11 fights, which means that the only reason these fights are down here is because all of the other fights are better than them, not because it's how I would grade them individually. This fight's good. It's pretty engaging in the anime, and narratively it does a really good job conveying how powerful Temari is. Plus, it's like the only time pre-Shippuden we get to see Tenten do anything. But it's held back substantially by the fact that in the manga, it's just one panel. Now, when analyzing it as a scene or a moment rather than as a fight, I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that. It's pretty funny, and it's a time-efficient way to convey the exact same thing the anime version does. That said, I'd be extremely hard-pressed to call this one panel a good fight, so that's why it's chilling all the way down here. Yeah, whatever. I know, this fight's way higher than most of you expected, and plenty of you are probably typing an angry comment as we speak. But just keep in mind, we are still at the second lowest tier of the list, and this is the second lowest fight in that tier. So I'm not calling it a masterpiece or anything. I just don't think it belongs in the evil doo-doo butt dungeon along with Kabuto and Team 7 versus Team Oboro or Team Guy versus Team Guy. I think it's better than all of the early War Arc fights probably. Like I said earlier, maybe you could go over it with a microscope and adjust their individual placements a little bit, but generally speaking, I think this fight is more compelling than any of those are. Maybe this is just me, but every time I get to it, I'm way more personally invested than I am in any of the fights in G tier, because I actually want Sakura to win since she's a main character and you spend so much time with her up to this point. This fight's really not as bad as people say it is, at least not the manga version. I'll admit the anime version is pretty slow and a little boring, so this is actually the inverse of 10-10 versus Tamari. This time I like the manga version a lot more, and the anime is what's holding it back. This fight does its job pretty well. The combat itself is good, it lets us know how strong Sasori is supposed to be, and it gives Sakura the opportunity to interact with his poison so she can make an antidote for it. The problem I have with it is, after this fight happens, Kankuro becomes impossible to respect or take seriously for the whole rest of the series. I know Kishimoto wanted to make Sasori look strong, but he practically deleted Kankuro from the series in the process. This is such a minor fight that I considered not including it, but it managed to climb this far up the list, so why not? It's a short skirmish between Sasuke and the character literally no one likes or cares about, but it's cool, it's well choreographed and visually stimulating. It has less of an effect on the plot than any of the other fights we've talked about so far, but aside from that, there's really nothing wrong with it. I hate that this fight is so short. Like, it's really, really short, and I want to put it higher, but I just can't because there's barely anything here. If it had been extended to the length of a proper battle, it probably would have been one of the coolest fights in the whole series. Speaking of fights that would have benefited from being longer, man, the way this fight starts is so good, and then it just abruptly ends. Like, I would have loved to see the whole thing play out. Basically exactly what I said with the last fight. It's super cool, but there's not enough here for me to put it any higher. This is the same deal as the last two. It's a good fight, but if it was longer, I'd like it more. I know many of you are probably wondering how this fight snuck all the way up here to number 81 of 99, but I mean, I like it. The Shippuden flashback version of this fight in the anime is also doing a lot of favors. The very end where Baki actually kills Hayate is really cool, and maybe I shouldn't be taking it into consideration because it's like a weird filler version of the fight, but I don't even know if I have to. Like, even though nobody cares about Baki or Hayate, the circumstances of the fight add more intensity to it than something like Mifune versus Hanzo. The fight also feels more complete than the last three, so I think this is a pretty good spot for it. This fight is also very short, but it's pretty good. Like with 10-10 versus Tamari, it conveys how powerful one of the Sand siblings is very effectively, and it also has a few twists and turns along the way. This fight's pretty funny, but because it's literally supposed to be a waste of time, like that's what Toby's goal is, to make sure the Itachi Pursuit team doesn't make it to Sasuke and Itachi's fight before it finishes, that is how the fight feels, like a waste of time. I don't think I've ever gone back to read it or watch it in isolation. It's pretty good though. Like I said, Toby is funny, and the moment at the end where he reveals that he's actually Madara is really cool. I like this fight, but it's really, really long and not super focused, so going back to watch or read it is pretty difficult. It includes a lot of great moments, so I feel bad putting it this low, and you could probably convince me to kick it up a few spots. It's just difficult to evaluate because of how long it is. Two different fights happen while this fight is ongoing, Kakashi versus Obito and the flashback Madara versus Hashirama. So this fight actually has the opposite problem that most of the fights in this tier have, which is that it's way too long. Moving on to E tier, this is the last group of fights we have to cover before I feel we get to the truly great stuff. If I had to title this tier something aside from a letter, I'd probably give it good with an asterisk at the end. Despite the fact that it's at the bottom, Naruto vs. Kiba is more or less representative of all the fights in this tier. I always have a good time with it and don't think it has any glaring issues, but I have a lot of small problems with it that keep me from enjoying it as much as I want to. The highlights of this fight, the Fang over Fang, the Uzumaki Barrage, and Naruto's double transformation plan are all great. It's just paced weirdly. It drags in places where it really shouldn't, and sometimes comes to a complete stop. Way too much time is spent on Naruto getting up after being punched once, and that scene's also played like a big triumphant moment when again Naruto got hit and got up. That's all that happened. Like I said though, these aren't major issues. The good definitely outweighs the bad here. This fight has some of the coolest visual moments in the series and is extremely intense. Like, I love Asaku Jaku, Kisame riding in on the wave is great, but I really don't like these fake Akatsuki clone fights. They feel like, and ultimately are, just wastes of time. It's a little bit difficult for me to decide which fight I like better out of the two, which is why they're so close together on the list here. But I think I prefer this one because I like Naruto and Kakashi's teamwork and find it more satisfying than Guy beating Kisame by himself. Asaku Jaku is dope, but it would have been neat to see Lee, Neji, and Tenten do something aside from getting trapped in water prison. The only issue I have with this fight is that Fu and Torune are kinda whatever, but for a minor, like, side story B battle, this is pretty good. It's well choreographed and clever, and watching Obito fight anyone is always fun. It doesn't overstay its welcome either, it seems aware of its own unimportance. I'd probably put it higher if it was more meaningful, since it has practically no narrative implications, it's just carried by how cool it is. This one's short and pretty basic. In the manga, it's like 8 or 9 pages long, so there's not a lot to talk about here, but hey, it's Shikamaru, everybody likes Shikamaru, and this is a pretty good first outing for him. It sets out to show us how smart he is, and it succeeds. The manga version of this fight is quite a bit different than the anime version. It's shorter and isn't shown concurrently alongside other events. It all happens at once in the manga. It's weird because I have different problems with both of them. I think the anime version is too bloated and the manga version is a bit too short. That said, I still like what's here. It's a welcome opportunity to see how much Naruto and Sakura have grown since the first bell test in part 1. This isn't how we get introduced to Gaara, but it is the first time we get to see him in action, and it's awesome. It's against a bunch of nobodies, and it's hard to even call it a fight, which is why it isn't higher, but it's iconic for a reason. This one's surprisingly short and anticlimactic for the final fight of the arc that it's in. It's like 2 chapters long, and it doesn't actually end up mattering since Deidara survives in the end. Overall, I like it though, and it has some great moments. We get to see Kamui for the first time, and by extension, this is how we learn that Kakashi can use the Mangekyo Sharingan. Plus, seeing Naruto lay the schmack down on Deidara always makes me happy. Channel veterans, you may be surprised by how high this fight is on the list. Those of you who are new here, some time ago I made a video titled The Worst Fight in Naruto, and this fight was the subject. Now, in my defense, I did say that I thought it was only the worst major fight in Naruto, because I had some what I thought were insightful things to say about it, and didn't want to talk about, like, Team Guy versus Team Guy or whatever. Obviously, my opinion of it has improved since then, because it's all the way up here at number is slipping my mind. I don't remember what number we're on. But anyway, there is a lot to like about this fight. Neji's extremely cool and imposing, and the 64 palms is one of my favorite jutsu in the series. But everything that I said I didn't like about the fight in that video still applies for the most part. In a fight where the subtext is that Naruto's trying to prove to Neji that fate and gifts aren't absolute, it really sucks that he goes from failing to land a single hit on Neji before he uses the Nine Tails chakra to beating Neji in one punch after he uses its chakra. I think the broad stroke storytelling and theming here is good, and the fight has some visually spectacular moments, but in execution, it's very flawed. This fight starts off strong and falls off as soon as Kisame traps B in the bubble. That part's pretty boring, and in the anime specifically is really long. I love the beginning, like I said, the pencil moment, Kisame getting his chest ripped open by B, it's all great, but there's such a steep drop off around the halfway point that I don't think I can put this fight any higher than this. It's awesome that we get to see Itachi and Sasuke fight side by side before the end of the series, and Kabuto is a solid enough villain, but aside from that, the fight doesn't do anything to wow me, and Izanami is a pretty lame way to wrap it up. Alright, so this is where we start to get to the really good stuff. I don't really have any problems with any of the fights from here on out. I think they're all excellent. If any issues do come up, they'll likely be small or massively overshadowed by what I think the fight does right. I figured this fight would make a good benchmark for around this point in the list. It's solid, doesn't have any glaring problems, and does exactly what it sets out to do. It's good from top to bottom. It's got tons of great moments like Iruka outsmarting Mizuki, Iruka protecting Naruto from the shuriken, and Naruto making however many shadow clones this is. This is another short one with some no-name bad guys, but despite that, it manages to be pretty good. The choreography here is spectacular, and the events provide characterization for the main cast that's welcome and still very necessary this early on in the series. It also sets up the encounter with Zabuza, and in doing so, creates the framework for the entire rest of the arc going forward. I wish I could say this fight was more important, but narratively it doesn't accomplish much. Zaku gets an off-screen death shortly after this, and Shino is outside of a fight I put all the way down in G tier, practically never relevant again. But despite that, this fight is still really cool, especially in the manga. The anime version gets dragged down hard by some backstory for Zaku that I couldn't care less about, but I really like everything else, and there's one moment in particular that carried the fight this high, and that's Zaku blowing up his arms from the inside after Shino plugged up the holes in his hands. The only thing that sucks about this fight is that it doesn't actually end. It's a little inconclusive, but that's not really a problem, because that's kind of how it had to be. Lee stopping short of actually using the primary Lotus on Sasuke, that makes sense. After all, the purpose of this fight was to introduce and hype up Rock Lee and to get the audience excited to see what he was going to do next. And by the way, don't think this even needs to be said, but it did a good job. Setting aside all the meta-narrative stuff, it's also just a great fight, even if it is a little short. The scene of Sasuke getting kicked in the face is iconic for a reason. This one's long, and the quality is a bit inconsistent, but considering both the high points and the low points, I think this is where it averages out to. There are some sections I find dull or underwhelming, and because of how many characters are present, it does feel a bit bloated at times, but the highlights make up for that. There's some really cool stuff that happens in this fight, and Naruto versus the third Raikage specifically is awesome. I'll admit right from the beginning here that this one's placement has less to do with the action and more to do with the context of the scene. Now don't get me wrong, there are some striking visuals in this fight. In particular, I'm a huge fan of the panel where Sasuke first enters second state, but if I'm being honest, as like a fight, it's not better than some of the stuff I have it ahead of. Getting to see Orochimaru's body stealing ritual for the first time is incredible though, and I think the sheer catharsis of Sasuke finally beating Orochimaru and eliminating the looming threat of him having his body stolen is enough to get it this high. What can I say? I like Sasuke. I know this fight is probably way higher than a lot of you would put it, but I really do think this is where it belongs. Yeah, it's the third highest fight of the Chunin exam preliminaries, but it's great. The Lion's Barrage is awesome, and I like the dynamic presented by Yoroi's ability to absorb chakra. I also think it acts as a neat bit of foreshadowing. Sasuke's decision to activate the Sharingan even when under the threat of the curse mark shows he's willing to risk destroying his own body in pursuit of his goals, much like his decision to train with Orochimaru, even though by doing so he risks having his body stolen. And just like how he's able to suppress the curse mark and eventually defeat Yoroi, Sasuke is able to stop Orochimaru from stealing his body before using his training to hunt down and kill Itachi. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but if it was, it's an extremely cool parallel. This one's really short, the shortest one that's managed to sneak up this high for sure, but the action is great, the encounter is intense, and it's between two characters that I enjoy watching. Is it too high? Maybe a little, but I'm not moving it down. This fight's pacing suffers because it frequently gets interrupted for the sake of exposition dumping, but when Neji and Hinata are fighting each other, it's super entertaining. Plus, the information we get out of this is really important. It's practically vital going forward. As a character moment for Neji, Hinata, and even for Naruto, I think this fight excels too. So even though I have a handful of issues with it, I really like it in spite of them. I'll admit not a whole lot happens in this fight. It's really just Guy and Kisame throwing a couple big stupid attacks back and forth at each other, but hey, all I really needed to convince me to put it this high was getting to see Hirudora and the 7th Gate for the first time. This one's intense and very scary. When I first saw this as a kid, I was genuinely concerned that Sakura and Lee were gonna get themselves killed. I don't think there are any low points here. Every section of this fight is good, even the Sakura section. I know not everybody's gonna agree with that, but I enjoy watching her use the substitution jutsu this creatively to outsmart the Sound Ninja. Getting to see more from Lee and the Inoshika Cho trio is also welcome, but the real highlight of this fight is Sasuke waking up with an active curse mark at the end and using it to blow Zaku down. So even though we're in C tier now, you gotta remember, D tier was where I said we're getting to the really good stuff. From here on out, it's nothing but bangers. Fights I have few to no issues with and have gone out of my way to rewatch before. This fight's phenomenal, both as an action set piece and as a vehicle for educating us more about the characters that take part in it. I don't think it's possible not to like Kakashi after watching this, and it also fleshes the three Genin out and makes them more compelling. My favorite section of the bell test is shockingly the Sasuke section, but I also think that Naruto and Sakura have good scenes as well. Everybody remembers 1,000 Years of Death, and Kakashi uses Sakura to demonstrate what a genjutsu looks like to us for the first time. This fight's awesome. I love pretty much every panel from the manga version, and the anime version has super clean and fluid animation. Kakashi and Obito are super fun to watch, the choreography's probably the best on the list so far, and the context that this adds to the main story is initially just welcome and enriching, but eventually becomes vital. Yeah, this one's a classic. It kind of speaks for itself. Honestly, I'm a bit worried that I have to explain why I put it this low rather than why I put it this high. I know a lot of people really like this fight. Many of you probably even like the still image of Madara and the Nine-Tail staring Hashirama down more than most of the fights we've talked about so far. It's definitely an iconic shot, and this is one of the most iconic fights in the series for good reason too. The context alone is exciting. This is practically the most legendary battle in Shinobi history. It's been mentioned and hinted at since all the way back in part 1 when Naruto and Sasuke met in the final valley, so finally getting to see it was incredibly satisfying. Some of you guys may have already left a comment about this by now, but yeah, you could probably split this fight and some other fights into multiple smaller fights. Maybe Naruto and B versus Obito and the Jinchuriki is a different fight from Naruto, B, Kakashi, and Guy versus Obito and the Jinchuriki, and maybe that's a different fight from Naruto, B, Kakashi, and Guy versus Obito and Madara, but I don't really consider Kakashi and Guy showing up the conclusion to the first fight there. I feel like it's just part of the same fight. Anyway, this one's long, and because of how long it does have some moments that I'm not the biggest fan of, but the highlights here are incredible. If you've been around the channel for a while, what I'm about to say won't surprise you, but I really like the Madara section in particular. Uchiha Reflection is super cool, and the Guy blasting Madara Susanoo with the Hirudora is equally cool. Guy and Kakashi are also loads of fun to watch. Lightning Cable specifically is one of my favorite jutsu in the series. But even the beginning portion of the fight, where it's just Naruto, B, Obito, and the 6 Jinchuriki, I really like it. The later portions certainly help it out a lot, but I don't think any of the core sections of this fight are bad. There's not a whole lot to this one, but what is there is like, come on, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like the big old Mega Rasengan barrage, the Rasen Shuriken, tug of war at the end. Even though some stuff happens in the middle of it that extends it, it's pretty short in terms of actual runtime. But while the fight's actually going on, it's so high energy, dude. I love it. Like I alluded to earlier in the video, I cannot believe this didn't get a boss fight in Storm 3. This fight is crazy, dude. Like, let's just go over some of the stuff that happens in this fight. Naruto almost gets his soul ripped out. Nagato sucks up so much chakra that he stops being crippled and is able to use his legs again. Itachi straight up switches sides. They blow up Chibaku Tensei at the end. Like, it's so cool. I'm honestly surprised I don't have it higher. It only managed to make it smack dab into the middle of the list, but I guess Naruto just has a lot of really good fights. You see what I'm talking about? Like, what's this one doing all the way down here? I thought it was one of my favorites, but it's barely cracking the top 50. We get to see Naruto and Sasuke use their cool new 6 paths powers, and everybody likes good old Madara, so this fight kind of had to be good. That said, for what it is, I think it's way too short. I am still, to this day, not happy about how it ended. This fight could have been way longer and way more climactic. I don't think that it would have suffered from being extended, but still, what we got is perfectly fine. More than that, actually. It's very good. Yeah, I know, putting this above Naruto and Sasuke versus Madara is a little out there, but I really do think it's that good. Just go back and watch it again for yourself if you don't believe me. I promise it's better than you remember it being. The action and pacing here are surprisingly tight. Even though the fight is really short, it manages to make a lot out of its limited runtime. All the character stuff we get here is excellent too. Sasuke shows everyone how far gone he is. Sakura is forced to come to terms with the fact that Sasuke is not the same person he used to be. Kakashi's forced to come to terms with the same thing and sees himself in the same position Hiruzen was in back when he fought Orochimaru in part 1, and Naruto stays as stubborn and unyielding as ever. This is another long one, right? Like, some people consider it its own arc, and like all of the other long fights I've talked about, this one suffers from having some moments I'm not a huge fan of. The pacing isn't perfect. But this is made up for by the fact that it has some of my favorite moments in the whole series spread throughout it. Like, a lot of them, in fact. It's kind of bloated and inconsistent, but the high points here are too great to ignore. Plus, this doesn't really have anything to do with the fight, but Ten Tails Jinchuriki Obito has one of my favorite designs, not just in Naruto, but across all of media. I'd say that Naruto and Sasuke vs. Madara is definitely more consistent, but this one absolutely has higher peaks. This one is so intense and high octane, man. It's not super long, there's not a whole lot to it, but what's there, it just gets me so excited every time I watch or read it. Plus, of course, most importantly, we have this fight to thank for teaching us that Naruto is 73 times faster than the Raikage after all. It's been a while since we talked about any fights from the Kazekage rescue arc, and it's been a really long time since we talked about any fights that took place in the air, but this one is a good example of both of them. It happens right after we find out that Gaara's become Kazekage too, so getting to see what he's capable of at the same time as we get to meet a new member of the Akatsuki, it's hard to ask for any more than that. This fight's unique because, like I said earlier, it takes place in the air, and one aspect of that I love is how creative it is for Gaara to use his sand to create a cloud below his feet. This is just a really cool matchup, and it also has extremely high stakes, since if Gaara loses, he's gonna die. We've officially entered the big boy zone. Now that we're in B tier, I don't think I have anything bad to say about any of the fights moving forward. Maybe a complaint or two will slip through the cracks, but I'd honestly be surprised because I really like all of these fights. Also, just as a fair warning, brace yourself for a lot of Sasuke fights. We're gonna go through quite a few of those in a row here. Putting the Kaguya fight above Naruto and Sasuke versus Madara? Why, yes, in fact I am, because this one's actually a complete fight. In the anime, the animation can get a bit but it still manages to look pretty good on the whole. The manga version's my preferred way to experience it though, and reading this as it was happening was crazy. Yeah, Kakashi getting the perfect Susanoo, that's stupid, sure, but it's also very cool. And the final act of teamwork between Team 7 at the end, not only is it clever, but it's also very satisfying and even a little heartwarming. This is one of the most necessary fights in the series. There's a massive gap in power at this point between Sasuke and his two former teammates, and Kishimoto had to let us know that somehow. This fight had been silently built up to for a long time, since the final valley, arguably since the Chunin exams when Orochimaru first warned Sakura that Sasuke would seek him out in search of power. All that stuff gets paid off here. It turns out Orochimaru wasn't lying at all. By training with him, Sasuke got strong, and he lets everybody know with all sorts of cool new shit he couldn't do last time we saw him. This is the complete opposite of the last fight in all but its necessity. It's just as important, but Sasuke gets humbled big time here. The Chidori that starts it all off is gorgeous, and every hit that Sasuke takes afterwards is brutal. The anime version adds some serious weight to Itachi's punches and kicks, which helps illustrate how hopeless this is for Sasuke. Jiraiya getting to be cool at the end is a nice bonus too. Crystal Ice Mirrors is still one of the most unique jutsu we've ever seen. The Sasuke vs Haku solo section at the beginning is great. Sasuke saving Naruto is an incredible character moment. And finally, of course, there's the moment at the very end of this fight where Naruto uses the Nine Tails chakra and completely steamrolls Haku. This one's a classic for sure. Landing just outside the top 40 is our first fight from the Sasuke retrieval arc, and this one is super cool. When looking back over this list, I was worried I had it a little too high, but no, this is definitely where it belongs. Just go back and watch it if you don't remember. It's basically just 2 minutes of some of the best hand-to-hand combat in the series, and the animation is shockingly good for how minor the fight is. It's really hard for me to decide which one's better between this and the Sound 4 fight, but I think this one edges it out just a bit because it involves Naruto. The rivalry between Naruto and Sasuke is a core aspect of the series, and this is actually the first time we get to see them fight, ever. The action here is great too. I love how tangible the environment feels. Sasuke kicking Naruto into some laundry and then beating him up while he's covered by it, that's great. The clone section's my favorite part of the fight though. Hey man, listen, all the Sound 4 fights are great, one of them just had to be the least great. I know everybody has their own opinions about how they'd rank these and whatnot. This being placed here might upset some people, but look, like I said, I like it. I like all the Sound 4 fights. Sakon's even my favorite member of the group, actually. I also don't normally like Kiba or Kankuro, but this fight makes them both look extremely respectable. Who doesn't love to see a good bit of 4D chess, huh? Not much else to say about this other than it's really fun to watch Shikamaru outsmart people. The continuity between this fight and Naruto vs Neji is particularly clever too. This one and the last one could honestly go either way. I just think that Tayuya is a more interesting opponent for Shikamaru because of her big summons and crazy genjutsu, and I also think that the fight feels more intense because Shikamaru is actually at risk of death here, not just not becoming a Chunin. The highlights here are your typical Shikamaru moments, but I think my favorite one is him breaking his own finger with Shadow Possession to snap himself out of Tayuya's genjutsu. If the animation here was as clean as it is in something like Sasuke vs the Sound 4, this fight would probably be like top 20. Just like everybody else, I love Kakashi and I love Pain, and getting to see the two of them interact is just as cool as you'd think it would be. I enjoy this fight for the same reasons I enjoy the last two. It's a ton of fun watching Kakashi try and outsmart someone who's way stronger than he is. This is such a crazy matchup. It's so perfect. Kidomaru was practically the only member of the Sound 4 who could have fought Neji, and Neji was practically the only member of Shikamaru's team who could have fought Kidomaru. Watching them counter, outplay, and adapt to each other over the course of the fight is extremely entertaining from start to finish. As good as all the fights in B tier were, now that we're in A tier, you can obviously expect these to be even better. These fights are spectacular, and while we haven't reached the very best that Naruto has to offer yet, we're getting pretty close. This was like the Super Bowl for me when I was a kid, dude. I could not wait to see this fight. So after the first announcement and all this time and build up and the fight getting delayed, it could have ended up being a huge disappointment, but it wasn't. The hand-to-hand section, or I guess you could say hand-to-sand section at the beginning of the fight is solid. Honestly, better than it needed to be. It's got really good shot composition and some creative choreography. My favorite part of the fight, though, well, I'm pretty sure it's the same as everybody else's. This is one of those classics. Everyone remembers this fight. I'm pretty sure any of you watching right now could name at least one or two moments from it if I asked you to. There's a lot to like here. As usual, Kakashi's the coolest guy in the whole entire universe, and Zabuza's a good opponent for him. I also think that the way that Naruto and Sasuke end up contributing here is very clever. Not just the plan itself, which is also very clever, but I'm talking more on a meta level. With an opponent like Zabuza, they obviously can't straight up fight him, so locking him in place and making their objective to just get him to move his arm, it's a smart way to get them involved, and like I said, the plan that they end up coming up with to save Kakashi is awesome. Like the last one, I'm pretty sure my favorite moment from this fight is the same everybody else would pick, the double water dragon at the end. That's some good Naruto right there. This has got to be the most underrated Naruto fight ever. I don't see anyone talk about it despite how cool it is. I'll admit it's short and pretty simple, but this is such a colossal act of disrespect on Tsunade's part that you gotta respect it. And the moment at the end where she stops Naruto's like, incomplete Rasengan or whatever you want to call it by breaking open the ground with one finger. So sick, dude. Yeah, you guys know me. I like Madara. One of his fights was bound to make it up here eventually. Honestly, like I said, I'm pretty sure some of you guys are shocked that I put the other two Madara fights as low as I did. But I couldn't help myself with this one. By now, the moment where he asks the 5 Kage if they'd like his clones to use Susanoo or not is pretty famous, and the perfect Susanoo is pretty sick too. But Madara is not the only person who gets cool moments in this fight. Tsunade is a beast, as it turns out. You get to watch that woman go to work here. She gets straight impaled by his Susanoo, doesn't care about it, not one bit. Gets the sword out of there, then gets busy laying the schmack down on Madara. The other Kage are pretty cool too, but Madara and Tsunade are the stars of the show here, in my opinion. Oh my god, dude. Like, man. What is this Game of Thrones ass fight doing in Naruto? Obito is a straight up demon here. This has got to be the most ruthless, savage act of bullying in the whole series, right? There are multiple things that this fight arguably does better than any other in the series. The hand-to-hand combat here, the way ninja tools are used, and my favorite aspect, the way fire style is used. Like, Sasuke melts off his face! This is also probably the scariest Orochimaru has ever been, which is saying something since being creepy and ominous is kind of his whole thing. While the best part of the fight is definitely Sasuke versus Orochimaru, and for once, I don't think that's my bias talking, I think we can all agree that that's the case, Naruto gets some good moments here too. I'm a big fan of his entrance, his interactions with Sasuke, and him beating up the giant snake. This fight is also obviously very important since it's where the seeds for one of the series' most important subplots get planted. This fight is just really good. It basically sets up the entire arc single-handedly by killing Asuma and giving Shikamaru the ability to see what Hidan can do firsthand. The coolness level here is also like off the charts. Shikamaru, Asuma, Kotetsu Izumo, Hidan Kakazu, all extremely cool characters, and pretty much every combat interaction is also extremely cool. Also, because the fight revolves pretty much entirely around Hidan's immortality and the mechanics of the Jashin curse ritual, the fact that it essentially forces the reader or viewer to figure out how that works along with all the other characters makes it even more engaging than it already is in the first place. Speaking of insane and over the top, here we have the fight with Drunk Lee and Sand Tsunami. At the time that it happened, this was definitely the second or third craziest fight in the whole series, behind only Naruto vs. Gaara and Gaara vs. Lee. Kimimura's Kekkei Genkai is also extremely unique, and I think that watching his abilities interact with Gaara's specifically manages to be interesting all the way up until the end of the fight. While I'm a fan of the Sasuke section here, for once it's not my favorite part of the fight. Naruto totally steals the show from him. In my opinion, this is Naruto versus Neji, but done well. The hard-headed brute force approach that Naruto takes to this fight is perfectly emblematic of the sort of person he is, and leads to some awesome set pieces, like the 2K barrage and the headbutt at the end. This fight's just really cool. It's an interesting matchup, it's got a ton of big explosions, and it's got incredible paneling and shot composition. This is absolutely Conan at her best, and it's got some of my favorite moments from Obito too. I really wanted to throw it into S tier, but there just wasn't quite enough room. Now that we've reached S tier, we'll be looking at fights that are nothing short of what I'd consider all-stars of Naruto's catalog. These are examples of the series at its best, and are all in my opinion close to, if not outright perfect. All of these fights contain impeccable action set pieces, and progress or enhance the story as they happen seamlessly and meaningfully. I'm impressed by how much this fight manages to achieve while still being fast-paced and engaging. It introduces the audience to two of the series' most memorable villains, establishes the Akatsuki and explains what it is, debuts the Mangekyo Sharingan, and pays off all the build-up that Itachi had received up to this point. Those are all incredibly important aspects of the story, and I haven't even mentioned yet how Kakashi being hospitalized further incentivizes Naruto and Jiraiya to track down Tsunade. Narratively, as a scene, it pulls its weight and then some, and as a fight, boy is it entertaining. Itachi does more than enough crazy shit here to leave a lasting impression on the audience, not the least of which is using Tsukuyomi for the first time, which is one of the most iconic scenes in the series. So just to be clear, this includes the entirety of Tsunade, Shizune, Naruto, and Jiraiya versus Kabuto and Orochimaru. This fight is fucking awesome. Every section of it is great. Kabuto roiding up and fighting Tsunade, Naruto trying and failing to summon Gamabunta again, Jiraiya fighting Orochimaru on top of the snake, the Sannin performing their respective summoning jutsu, Tsunade clobbering Orochimaru and using Gamabunta's sword as a weapon, and of course, who could forget Naruto using the Rasengan for the first time on Kabuto. This fight completes Tsunade's character arc and allows Naruto to take a step forward in his, all while delivering spectacular visuals and character moments. Come on, man. Don't make me explain this one. We're all on the same page already, surely. This is the best Sound 4 fight, and it's not close. When he jumps in front of the rest of the team to deal with Jirobo himself, it's so sick, and the fight only gets crazier from there. Later on, Choji expands to the size of the whole forest and body slams Jirobo, and it doesn't work. Jirobo just picks him up. The end of the fight is what gets it all the way up here, though. Butterfly Choji is such an ice-cold fucking thug. Alright, so most of the fights from the Kazekage Rescue Arc are in or below E tier, and the same goes for most fights that involve puppet masters. The only other Sakura fight in the series that doesn't involve any other main characters is all the way down in F tier, and like I said when talking about it, I'm pretty sure people are going to tell me I put it way too high. This fight is like an unholy trinity combination where all three of those things are present, and still landed itself all the way up here in S tier. It is by far the best fight from the Kazekage Rescue Arc, by far the best puppet master fight, and by far the best fight that focuses on Sakura. Even though the fight's split up into multiple sections, sort of like a multi-phase boss battle, I don't think there are any low points here. It's fun to watch Sakura and Chio fight Kiruko, the third Kazekage puppet, the 100 puppets that Sasori summons, and Sasori's puppet body. Sasori himself is charismatic enough and has abilities that are cool enough that he left a lasting impression on me despite the fact that this is really his only major fight. The animation here is extremely fluid. Sakura and Chio make an interesting team. This fight excels in practically every area. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. This is another one that everybody likes. In fact, it's so popular that I'm worried I don't have anything new to say. As plenty of other people have pointed out before, the animation, character dynamics, choreography, and pacing here are all perfect. It's an achievement in visual storytelling that puts many of the series' best aspects to good use and deserves all of the praise that it receives. So a problem that you're likely to run into when dealing with prequels or flashbacks or things of that nature is a lack of tension because you already know what to expect. When the story is covering an event with a known outcome, this problem is even worse. Flying right in the face of all of that, we have Minato versus Obito, without a doubt one of the most intense fights in all of Naruto. The one-touch kill dynamic of the fight probably has something to do with that. Minato and Obito are such interesting opponents for each other because they basically do the same thing. Both of them can teleport and can essentially beat anyone they're fighting by simply establishing physical contact. This means both of them are incredibly fast and by extension hard to hit, but all either of them needs is a single good hit and the fight is over. Watching both of them fish for the one hit they need to win is incredible, and the way that this contextualizes one of the most important historic events in the series makes it an almost necessary addition to its fight catalog. It would have been insane of me to put this fight anywhere lower than S tier, and I'm probably gonna get burnt at the stake for putting it outside the top 15. As I've already said though, I think everything in S tier and above is perfect, and this fight is no exception. As a payoff to the enormous amount of build-up the 8th gate had received, this is extremely effective. Guy's thrown up against the most impossibly strong opponent imaginable, Madara Uchiha with the power of the Ten Tails, and he's actually able to keep up with him. Depending on who you ask, Guy was actually winning this fight, although it did take a little bit of outside help. As is standard for around this point in the list, the fight is visually stunning and conceptually brilliant. Some of the coolest attacks and action set pieces in the series make their appearance here, like Sekizo and, of course, Night Guy.
Number 15, Burger King Foot Lettuce.
This is where everything we learned in the aftermath of Itachi's death comes to a head. Sasuke seeking the same closure he thought he'd get by killing Itachi, and the only way it seems attainable to him is to kill Danzo and avenge his clan. The emotion here is palpable, especially in the Raikage section, which happens to be my favorite part of the fight, since both Sasuke and the Raikage are royally pissed off. In this way, the fight also acts as a payoff to Taka's fight with Killer B, since A thinks Sasuke killed B, while Sasuke doesn't care and just wants to get to Danzo. The action here is great and super varied because of how different all of the Kage's abilities are. Even the Kage's aides get some cool moments here, most notably Darui and Chojuro. In my opinion, it's made even more engaging by the fact that this is the first time we get to see most of these characters fight, and it also happens at a point in time where we're still not super familiar with the mechanics of Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan and are still in the process of learning how it works. This is just the type of fight that keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's filled with twists and turns and has plenty of stuff that will surprise you the first time you see it. I'm always down to watch Madara cause some mayhem, and this is one of the best examples of that. This fight feels desperate, chaotic, and unpredictable in a way that few others manage to. The allied shinobi forces is closer than ever to victory now that they've taken care of Obito, and all they have to do is take out Madara, who's blind, by the way. The problem is, he's got Sage Mode, and later on, he gets one of his Rinnegan back. Everyone throws everything that they can at him, but it just doesn't work. The situation gets worse and worse until it ends with Naruto and Sasuke at death's door and Madara as the new Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails. This is up there with Pain's assault in contention for the most dire things have ever gotten in the series. Madara truly feels unstoppable here. What better way could there have possibly been to show us that Sasuke might be capable of killing Itachi than to have him kill another member of the Akatsuki? That's all this needed to be, a short little encounter where Sasuke beats Deidara, then goes on his way to find Itachi and kill him. Instead, it decided it was going to be one of the best fights in the whole series. It goes so far above and beyond what you'd expect of it. It even helps characterize Deidara. He had a whole arc where he was one of the primary antagonists, and you learn just as much about him, if not more here than you did in that entire section of the story. The action here is also next level, probably because watching Sasuke and Deidara interact is so interesting. This is also probably the best example of Sasuke's tactical prowess we ever get. Just based off this fight alone and nothing else, his brain is big. I know a lot of people aren't happy with the way it ended, and maybe it is a little contrived, but come on. It doesn't really bother me, and even if it did, everything else is way better than it would need to be to make up for that. Kakashi is so cool here, dude. It's a bit unfortunate for Zabuza because it makes him look a lot worse by comparison, but Kakashi stunts on him here. The highlight of this fight for me has to be everything involving Haku, though. From Kakashi hitting Haku with the Raikiri to Zabuza hesitating to cut through him and Kakashi at the same time. That small detail adds so much humanity to Zabuza as a character, and even helps set up what happens immediately after this fight, which is Zabuza running through all of Gato's men and killing him. It's a spectacular climax to Naruto's first story arc and to Zabuza's character arc. Here we are finally at double S tier. If S tier represented the best fights in the series, then double S represents the best of the best. This is the absolute pinnacle of what Naruto has to offer in terms of fights. It doesn't get any better than this. This is a really long one, but it doesn't have any low points, at least not that I could spot. In fact, I think every section here is in contention for the best part of the fight. Kakashi and Team 10 versus Hidan and Kakazu has incredible animation and moment-to-moment action. I'd go so far as to say is some of the best in the series. Shikamaru probably gets his best ever character moment when he buries Hidan, and later we get the debut and, in my opinion, best use of the Rasen Shuriken. Speaking of the Rasen Shuriken, and this might go without saying, I think this is a good character moment for Naruto too, since like with Sasuke versus Deidara, we get to see him take out a member of the Akatsuki here, and by extension, get a clear indication of how far he's come since the start of the series. The top-notch visuals and action set pieces, combined with the various aspects of the story that are being progressed or outright paid off here, creates a level of engagement that I feel simply isn't present in any other fight that we've talked about so far. This fight is so important, definitely one of the most consequential, at least of part 1 if not all of Naruto. Hiruzen dying and Orochimaru losing his arms are pivotal plot points presented through a fight that was, at the time it happened, on a scale totally unlike anything that had come before it. Because of the power level of both fighters in this specific situation, what's at stake here is magnified. As you watch this, it feels like if Hiruzen dies, no one's gonna be able to stop Orochimaru from wreaking havoc and doing whatever else he wants. He's got the first 2 Hokage at his disposal and will probably be able to revive the third after he kills him. Speaking of that, Orochimaru is just plain scary here. The shot of the first 2 Hokage stepping out of their coffins is chilling, and Orochimaru himself continues to be creepy and weird. This fight also accomplishes an impressive amount of world building. First of all, you may have missed this, but we're introduced to the Sound 4 here. They're the ones who create the barrier. We're also introduced to the reanimation jutsu here, and to the first 2 Hokage, and we learn more about the abilities of all 3 present Hokage, and we also learn more about Hiruzen's relationship with Orochimaru. It's difficult for me to concisely articulate how much worse the series would be without this fight. While we're on the subject of important fights, here's where we meet Pain and get introduced to mainstay concepts like Sage Mode and the Rinnegan. Obviously, this is also the fight where Jiraiya dies, which, you know, kind of a big deal. One thing I really like about it is something it has in common with the first Hidan encounter, which is that it forces the viewer to figure out the antagonist's abilities in real time. I also think that the Rinnegan feels just as scary and otherworldly as all the Jashin shit did. Even beyond that, the fight's just unsettling. Pain himself feels inhuman, and the visual design of the Rain Village makes the environment seem hostile too. It's also hard to deny how many memorable moments are present here. The massive Rasengan, the frog song, the gathering of the 6 paths of pain, and Jiraiya's death. Like all the other fights I've praised that introduced important villains, this one succeeds at its job, but does so with flying colors. I think this is the second most effective example of that in the series. The sheer power and versatility of the 6 paths of pain are conveyed flawlessly here. That's also not all the fight accomplishes either. Like the last one, the world building we get here is excellent, and Jiraiya's death is brutal and extremely effective. I know it didn't make everyone sad, but most people will tell you it was an emotional gut punch. Hey, what's good? It's number 8, and just don't worry, I'm not gonna do that. Anyway, the reason this fight is all the way up here is 99% because of the action. There is some neat stuff going on narratively here. This is Sasuke's first mission as a member of the Akatsuki, and this is also where we get introduced to Killer Bee. But I'm just going to be honest and say that here we have a case of the cool shit happening on screen or on the page being more important than the storytelling. It's just so much fun to watch. There are no sections here that I would describe as anything less than some of the coolest shit I've seen in my entire life. Also, Sasuke finally getting and using his Mangekyo Sharingan is just hype. I guess I can throw in some narrative points for the way that this enhances the 5 Kage Summit as well. Everything about this fight is top-notch. The dynamics present between Sasuke and Danzo, both on a character level and in terms of their abilities, leave nothing to be desired. Even though Sasuke is divisive, to say the very least at this point, Danzo is so hateable that it's impossible not to side with Sasuke. I remember watching this fight as it was airing on Crunchyroll, back when you would find the app by looking up like Watch Naruto Free Online on the App Store, and just being so invested. I wanted Danzo to die so bad. Sasuke's stronger here than he's ever been. The guy hits like a truck carrying nuclear artillery, but Danzo is immortal, at least for like 10 minutes. Izanagi's so cool, especially when Danzo's abusing it with his creepy, weird Sharingan arm. And the way that Sasuke manages to kill him by tricking him into thinking that one of his eyes is actually still open is one of my favorite little bits of tactical combat in the whole series. This fight is by a landslide the best fight from the Chunin exam preliminaries and one of the best fights in all of Naruto. Even if you isolate it and strip the rest of the series context away from it, it's a compelling underdog story with incredible action and animation. I know there are plenty of people out there who have watched this fight multiple times, but not a single second of any other Naruto material. That's a testament to how well it's paced and how well all of the exposition is handled. Even if you don't know anything else about Naruto, in this fight you're taught everything you need to know about these two characters. I don't think this negatively affects the pacing either, because every time the fight stops so something can be explained, it's immediately demonstrated and paid off through a nice visual reward. It's a genius level masterclass of action and storytelling that excels at everything it attempts to do, and having said that, yes, I only think it's the 6th best fight in Naruto. This is easily the best villain introduction in Naruto. Now, narratively, and I want to stress I only mean narratively, it's not particularly ambitious. Its only goal is to establish how strong Madara is. But if we grade it based on how well it achieved that goal, it's an A+, perfect score. I don't know if any of you ever had a teacher that would give you like 110 on a test if you did a really good job, but that's the sort of stuff we're talking about here. Aside from its narrative purpose though, which again, it excels at better than maybe every other Naruto fight, this fight is extremely ambitious. It's choreographed, directed, and animated brilliantly. It's got some extremely unique action set pieces that are brought to life and made to look gorgeous, both in the manga and in the anime. It's also littered with iconic or at least memorable shots and moments, like seriously, they're everywhere. On a meta level, one of the reasons this fight is so satisfying to watch is because it acts as a payoff to all of the hype and build-up Madara received throughout the series. As I've said in previous videos, there was a lot of that, by the way. The build-up period lasted for a very, very long time. Now, this could have been a double-edged sword because of how impossibly high it set the bar for Madara, but I think we can all agree that he cleared it and then some with his first appearance. Naruto vs. Pain is basically the climax of the second act of the story, and so obviously, like the last one, there's a lot of build-up here. Now, while this particular fight was foreshadowed and the entire arc was clearly leading up to it, I'm talking about the way that Naruto's big, heroic, save-the-day moment was built up to. Something like this eventually happening was kind of a foregone conclusion, given how the series started with Naruto making it as clear as he did that he wanted to be a distinguished ninja with everybody's respect. This is where Kishimoto keeps his promise that he's going to take this loser kid and turn him into a total badass. Pain's a perfect enemy for something like this. His abilities are extremely unique, and he's strong enough to push Naruto to his absolute limit. I don't just mean Naruto gets pushed physically here, either. Pain's strength is so great and so varied that Naruto's forced to use everything in his arsenal here. Everything that we've seen him train to develop and use over the course of the series makes an appearance in this fight. What makes this fight even more satisfying is that it retroactively adds meaning and purpose to many of the fights that Pain took part in before this. The intel that people like Kakashi and Jiraiya were able to gather by fighting Pain is crucial to Naruto's survival and eventual victory here. This fight also includes tons of extremely important character moments. This is basically where Pain's entire ideology gets laid out, mostly through his famous cycle of hatred speech to Naruto. Hinata finally confesses her love to Naruto here and even fights Pain to try and keep him safe, which is by far the most important thing she does in Shippuden. It's also revealed here that Naruto's dad was the 4th Hokage, and admittedly this may have been like a Jon Snow situation where everybody kind of already knew without being told, but still, setting aside how obvious it may have been, it's cathartic to see Naruto interact with his dad for the first time. Now, while the last two fights, maybe even the last 3 or 4, have more consistently good action and visuals than this one does, I think that the scene where Naruto in his six-tail cloak fights the Tendo Pain is on par with, if not better than anything present in all 4 of those fights. And in terms of narrative context, the only one that even belongs in the same conversation as this fight is Sasuke vs. Danzo. I'll admit that of the fights in double S tier, this one's placement is probably the most adjustable. I could totally see why someone might move it up or down a few spots, but all things considered, I think I've made a good case for it being the 4th best fight in Naruto. I'm not exactly sure how I want to phrase this next point, but we've been talking about build-up for a while, and I think the placement of the last two fights should convey how important I think it is. Having said that, the Sasuke-Itachi subplot was the one that I thought was by far the most interesting in the series, and it had existed since all the way back when Sasuke first introduced himself to Kakashi and the other members of Team 7. So the idea that this fight was going to happen was one that had, give or take, existed for around as long as the nebulous idea that Naruto was going to fight somebody like Pain. The difference between these two fights in that respect is that we knew Sasuke was going to be fighting Itachi specifically from the very beginning. So I think I can safely say, without making anybody mad, that this fight was probably the event that received the most intricate and lengthy build-up in the series. The first time I watched it, it was excruciatingly intense because, like everybody else, I thought Itachi was a psychopath who had killed his entire clan for no reason. Sasuke was playing with his life by trying to kill somebody who had the mindset that we all thought Itachi did, and every time we saw Itachi fight before this, he was on a completely different level than the person he was up against. The audience has given every reason to believe that Itachi is the most dangerous type of person, both because of his mentality and because of how powerful he is. And even though Sasuke was a core protagonist, you can call me naive for this, but I thought it was seriously possible that he was going to die here. In terms of the combat and visuals, I enjoy how back and forth the action is and think there are plenty of unique and exciting exchanges that Itachi and Sasuke have with one another over the course of the fight. I think it peaks twice, first when Sasuke uses Kirin, and immediately after that when Itachi uses the Susanoo for the first time. The aftermath of the fight includes what's probably my favorite exposition dump in the series. This is an insane plot twist that recontextualizes not only this fight, but a good chunk of the first half of Naruto. I know that this scene isn't actually a part of Sasuke versus Itachi, but I have a hard time separating the two, and I don't think that this scene can exist without the fight. Like Naruto versus Pain, this is another example of a fight that doesn't necessarily have better action than many of the other fights in Double S tier, but has so much more narrative weight to it that I think I can overlook that. Yeah, this is probably a little cliche, but honestly, who cares? I'm already a huge fan of this fight in the manga, but the anime version is definitely the definitive way to consume it. This is arguably where the series peaked in terms of animation, and all of the other important aspects like the directing and choreography are flawless. It's set up about as well as you could ask for, with the series-long rivalry between Naruto and Sasuke, and the sudden revelation at the end of the Kaguya fight that Sasuke is not actually on the same side as all of the other protagonists. Sasuke is the perfect final enemy for Naruto, both ideologically and in physical combat. They know each other better than practically anyone else, and that's one thing that makes it so satisfying both to watch them fight and to watch them talk things out after the fight. Naruto finally getting through to Sasuke resonated with me in a way that I'm not even sure I can properly describe, and that was just the cherry on top of one of the most gorgeous and exciting fights I've ever seen. When I started making this list, I knew this fight was going to be at the top. Literally everything that I look for in a Naruto fight is present here and is executed perfectly. No matter which metric we use to judge it, I think it's better than every other fight on this list. It's the best fight in the manga and the best fight in the anime. It's got my favorite character dynamic, character moments, character dialogue is built up to over the course of part 1 and over the course of the arc that it's the finale of, has the best animation in all of part 1 and arguably the entire series, has the best combat and choreography, has the best pacing, has the best back and forth shift between who's winning and who's losing, has some of my favorite uses of each character's respective abilities in the series, progresses the plot arguably more than any other Naruto fight. Like I said, anything that you want to look for in this fight is there and done brilliantly. This is the best one, and nope, I won't be taking any questions or discussing this further. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching this titanic behemoth of a video. It's almost killed me to put it all together. If you've stuck around this long, consider subscribing. If you don't want to, don't worry about it, but I'd really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching the video, and as always, take care of yourself and have a fantastic day. Swaikage out. Bye.